Welcome to Praise Hands, home of the Praise Hands, where we are all about creative cross-cultural Christianity. I'm your host, Robby Valderrama, and this is episode 50. When I was chatting with our team about how we could celebrate this, the idea came up to just have a Zoom party, invite all of our previous guests, and see who shows up. So that's exactly what we did. Enjoy the show, keep an ear out for the giveaway, and most of all, thanks for being on this journey of creative cross-cultural Christianity with us.
Yo!
What's up?
Oh, am I the first one here for the party?
You are the first one here.
Which is I guess is good because I'm usually late to a party.
So all I need to do is just tell you a different time zone when I want you somewhere. That's the moral of the story here.
Patrick, we need you here in a specific time. So I'm always 3 hours early somewhere.
We have the one and only Patrick Chappell.
Woo!
He let's see, what episode number were you? I'm sure you have this memorized. Episode number 28, the myth of organic diversity. We were not talking about farming. We were talking about a different type of culture.
We were. That was a fun time.
Yeah, it was.
We should do another one. And then you were on my podcast.
Yes. Tell us. Okay. So you were on the Praise Hands podcast. We also recorded an episode for your show. Can you tell us? So let me give you a little just brief synopsis of who you are and what we talked about on the show. And then I want you to tell everybody what life has been like since then and what you've been up to. So we talked through your story on the episode. Growing up in a couple different contexts. You were in like a super black church, a super not black church, and everybody at both of those were talking smack about the others and saying, no, those people are just so different. You're like, guys, I am in both. They're all humans, I promise. And you were in that sort of different environment. You ended up going to Lipscomb University.
That's right. And
found your way into the ministry. You were a big man on campus in Lipscomb. And now I'll spoil the your grand reveal in a second, but now you're the big man on campus pastor because you are a campus pastor, but I'll let you unpack that for us. But during the episode, we had a lot of great chats just about your story and also about really this myth of organic diversity, this thing where it's like, oh, it just needs to happen organically. Well, a lot of things that maybe might be best for us, we don't always feel like doing. I don't really feel like exercising 100% of the time. Actually, pretty much it's closer to zero, but it's like, I still need to do that because that's what's going to result in the best thing. And there's a lot of things that are like that in life. And one of those that we still experience the joy of and the fruit of is those efforts to put ourselves out of our comfort zone. So we had a great chat about that. And that was in 2020. So a little over a year ago is when the episode released. I think we recorded it a little while before that. So tell us about your podcast, the magnificent The Patrick Podcast, very modestly named. Well done there.
Yeah. So you can tell I'm super creative,
creative and very humble.
And very humble. Yeah. Yeah, no. So that's a great introduction. Yes, I do have my own podcast called Patrick, and really, it's just me talking to people that I find interesting, and I think everybody's interesting. So it's just me talking to the new person that I found interesting this week, and so it's just a really fun episode. I like to hear about people's stories, how they got to where they're at now, because it's always a fascinating story to hear the twists and turns, the disappointments, the regrets, the revealing, the revelations, all the different things that happens in a person's stories. And we've also done hot take episodes and pop culture episodes and other kinds in the early start of the podcast. It's a wonderful time. And now, as you said, I am among running a podcast. I also am the newly
enshrined. Enshrined.
Yeah, OC West End, Otter Creek. So there's a church in Nashville, Tennessee, or in the Nashville, Tennessee area called Otter Creek Church, and we just launched a new campus called OC West End, and we are here in Davidson County on West End. And it's just, we're having a good time. And we're going to be a ministry center. We're going to be a space for creatives and nonprofits and innovators and small business owners and just the community. And this is going to be amazing. We're going to do some, my dreams for this place is very large. And part of it is to kind of continue the work that folks like Robby's doing with Praise Hands, is to kind of continue to have these conversations on how we start really bringing all types of people to the table. Because guess what, folks? That's what heaven's going to be like. It's not going to be only a few of us. It's going to be a lot of us that are going to be different races and ethnic groups and gender and all that. Like, it's not going to be this limited small pocket of people, but the table is so large. But yeah, that's what's happening with me. And I DJ weddings too.
DJ Pat, hashtag DJ Pat. So we have a guest that is popping on here that is very special to me. Patrick, you're special to me too. But this, for our listeners, is my amazing wife, Bria Jean Valderrama. Everybody give it up for her.
Hey,
I haven't seen you in so long. Oh my goodness.
It's good to see you.
It's good to see you.
So
Wow.
I wanted Bria to be on the show because I see her all the time and know how amazing she is. And I have these conversations with such amazing people. She just happens to know Patrick, which that's awesome. But I was like, I want our listeners to get to hear just who my wife is. And that, even if it's just for 1 minute, because I think she's at a rehearsal tonight, but she was kind enough to hop on here. Bria, I could say a million things about you. You're beautiful. We've been married for over 10 years now. You love to travel. We love to travel together. Bria encourages me to try new things. She's been a huge champion for me on this journey, had so much grace for me as I've been learning and sometimes spending late nights studying, or, oh man, this interview opportunity just came up. I'm going to fly across the country like with 5 minutes notice, like that type of grace. So Bria, thank you for making this possible and for being you.
My pleasure. This is, wow, I did not expect that. I was thinking I'd just pop on here and listen to some wonderful, deep, amazing conversations. But I love Praise Hands. I just love the community because these conversations need to happen. And all of you guys on here, Robby, Patrick, all the awesome guests on here are like forerunners and pioneers. And I just see, Praise Hands is like a platform for pioneers to pioneer these kind of conversations that are going to bring healing. So that gets me excited. Got my teeth almost ready.
Amazing. Well, thank you for popping on. I love you. And
love you.
I hope you have a wonderful rehearsal tonight.
Oh, it's going down. It's so beautiful.
Yeah.
Practicing for brave worship. There's a bunch of ladies down there playing music and worshiping Jesus. Patrick, you need to come over for dinner. Good to see you.
Okay, I will.
See you later.
Yeah.
Have fun, you guys. Love
We
you
will.
guys.
We will. So Patrick, I thought that was a worthy interruption.
That was a worthy. That was the perfect interruption.
Yes. So you were, and we've been talking for like 10 minutes and you haven't even mentioned the band Weezer once. I just like to point that out. Just, okay. It's on your jacket. You went up to me there. But for people on the podcast, they can't see your jacket. He has a Weezer jacket on. Okay, Patrick, tell us, I'm not going to make you tell that story if you don't want to, but tell us a story about your relationship with the band Weezer. This is a hot take that you've had your whole life prepared for. So I have high expectations.
Yeah. I mean, there is, I don't know. I would probably say that at this point, I likely have a somewhat unhealthy love for Weezer. I've done some things. I've traveled to LA solely just to see a Weezer show. I have traveled, to Atlanta and to Chicago and all over the country just to see this band that I love. And I don't know. I mean, to me, the obviously the two of the best albums are, the Blue and then Pinkerton album. But for me, it's just for everyone out there who's listening, we all have potentially that band, whatever that band or that artist, that just for whatever reason, when you hear the way they arrange the words and the sounds, it just does something to you. And that's what Weezer does to me. And I know it's strange that a black man born in Birmingham, Alabama, and raised in Tennessee is a devoted Weezer fan, but here we are. And I've done odd things in the name of Weezer. And so, I don't know, you know, there's so I'll tell this Weezer story. This is not that story, but people are like, what is that story? It's like, yeah, you know,
you have to be like in Patrick's like paying membership for his podcast to get that story.
Right.
He's not just going to give that to anybody.
But no, so one time, this is one time we were in Chicago. We were in Chicago watching Weezer. This was like maybe the second time I was in Chicago seeing Weezer, and they were on this tour called the Memories Tour. And so this is a tour where they played one night. They played the whole Blue album, start to finish, one night, and then they would do that, and then they would take a break, come back, and do like a greatest hits.
Wow.
And then the second night where they came out and did all of Pinkerton, then took a break, came back, and then did a greatest hits on the second night. So it was like for a Weezer fan,
wow.
It was like the dream. So I mean, everyone picture your favorite band playing start to finish the two albums you love the most.
Yeah.
That's how epic this 2-day event was. Now, one of the days, I think this was the second day. So they're playing and they do they do Pinkerton, they go back and they come back and do the greatest hits. So my favorite Weezer song is called You Gave Your Love to Me Softly. It's from some of you who are a little bit older, remember the movie Angus. It was on the soundtrack to the movie Angus, which is this kind of quirky, you know, coming of age teen story that, you know, that was out in the 90s, you know. And so I've never heard this song live. I've been begging to hear this song.
Wow.
Live. It is my absolute favorite Weezer song. And you know how you know a song so much that if they even come close to it, you can like, this is the song. This is it. Yeah. And they did it. I'm on the front row. And this is why now I don't chew gum at a concert. They played it and I was like, wah! I start freaking out. And I freaked out so much that the gum, like my piece of gum went down the wrong pipe. And I'm like, I'm about to die. And I'm coughing and like needing my friend's help. And I'm like, but I'm in the moment of me almost dying. I'm like, this is amazing. I could be dying hearing my favorite Weezer song in a mosh pit. Like, this is how I want to die. This is it. I will go see King Jesus. After, was it a Hillsong concert? No. Was it Bethel? No. It was a Weezer concert.
Oh man! And I'm assuming that you survived.
I survived.
Okay.
Spoiler alert: I survived. I'm still here.
Man. Yeah, join Patrick's Patreon that he hasn't started yet to hear the other story that I'm thinking of and not going to put pressure on him to share. So tell us more. You are the campus pastor for this campus. You mentioned something about having some vision for doing some, interesting ways of engaging with the community. Can you share a little bit more about one, what that vision is, and also where that vision has come from? What sources of inspiration have there been for you that have given the shape to that vision?
Yeah. And so it's kind of it's in two parts how this vision kind of came to be. In part, this is ultimately some of this vision comes from our, some churches call them shepherds, some call them elders, some call them the board, whatever your kind of tribe calls the group of people that kind of sits in like kind of the leader or the kind of leader position. They created this vision called Vision 2029. And the reason that we have a Vision 2029 is because in 2029, Otter Creek Church turns 100 years old.
Wow. So
as anyone who's been in church world knows, like turning 100, that's a big deal. Like, in fact, you've been around for 100 years.
Right.
Because many of these churches, last for a good bit, but then like for whatever reason, like things kind of end or transition or whatever. And so they said, like, what are we going to do for these next 10 years as we're kind of leading ourselves into this kind of 100th year? And part of the vision was, how do we continue to be innovative? how do we continue to be creative? And in part, and like, how do we continue to like think like outside of ourselves, outside of what we do for us, but what our impact and presence is like in the city that we exist in. And part of that, vision was we also want to create create a new campus. But what we didn't know, what no one knew, is that part of the vision was going to happen in year one, right? And so, and I was telling our church on Sunday, I think it was, that be careful what you pray for. And sometimes you say the prayer and you expect the prayer to be answered years from now, but sometimes the prayer gets answered right away, sooner than you think. And so, we believe in the power of prayer, but also be careful if you're faithful people and you're praying, like the prayer might get answered immediately. And it also may take a long time, right? There's no like way to kind of put our minds around it on when and how that particular prayer and desire will be answered. And so here we are in the midst of launching this campus. And what we said in the launching of a new campus, a new space, is that what we didn't want to do is create a 2.0 of the thing that already existed. And the thing that already existed has a robust children's ministry, has a robust teen ministry, does all of these wonderful things so well. And we love it. We absolutely love it. But it's like, what does it look like to use a space and use it in such a different way than what a typical church would use their space? So instead of filling it just with classrooms and kids ministry and children, which are all wonderful, I am pro all those things. It's like, what if we did this and like created this thing where we do a ministry center that really does focus like what is our impact and how are we being outward minded focused? Like, what does it look like to be about? And the kind of theme of our kind of a ministry center is reconciliation. And we chose, I came up with that word. I didn't come up with the word, but the word kind of bubbled up to the surface as we met with a team of men and women. And we all talked about the things we would love to see happen involved in this ministry center. And reconciliation seemed to be like the thing that just came to the top. And what I love about that word is that it is at this point in our culture, a word that everyone knows. Everyone is familiar with the word reconciliation.
Right.
And what we're not familiar with is like, what is the work it takes to actually be a part of reconciliation and the birth reconciliation. And so that is what we're trying to be up to. And it's like, how to reconcile ourselves to creation, to our neighbor, and to ourselves. And that's something that is just like, we struggle with all those things, but all those things are integrated and connected. And so it's like, let's really put some emphasis on that. And then also like, what it looked like to fill the rooms that would be filled with typically like classrooms with nonprofit leaders, with creatives. And so we have this burst of innovation, this burst of creativity and connection and bringing back, because again, the church is still, especially here in America, in some ways, is still on this journey of trying to wrap our arms back around the creatives of all types that we have sometimes pushed away out of our church because, like, well, you can take that to the secular, quote unquote, venue and spaces. We don't have space or time or room for that. It's like, no, we want the creatives. You want the photographers, the videographers, the musicians, the visual artists, we want all those kind of people to kind of find their way back into this space and be a part of like the energy that we want to see happen, So I don't know.
Yeah.
That's some of the stuff. Yeah.
I love that. No, that's so good. It sounds like you guys have you guys have really tapped into, I think, some really big themes. This concept, like you said, of reconciliation, not just vertical and not even just horizontal, but really even with the world around us, the very nature itself. And my wife, who we obviously heard from just a few minutes ago, we are actually writing a song on that same theme. And some of the passages we're studying, some of the things we're going through is this concept of, okay, through one man, sin entered the world, through the disobedience of one man. And then basically all of creation got screwed because of that man's disobedience. And then Jesus, the second Adam, came along, and because of his obedience, then he releases his spirit to us. And out of that leads to our ability at the unveiling of the sons and daughters of God. Romans 8 just says sons, but that is what creation is actually waiting for. Mm-hmm. It's interesting. It doesn't say that it's waiting for like God to snap his fingers. It says it's actually waiting for the unveiling of the sons of God, which is really interesting. And that tells me, we have some sort of responsibility as sons and daughters of God to be the answer to the prayers of creation, if I could even put it that way. Yeah. And, we groan with creation for that restoration. And so in order to take that next step of that reconciliation, not just vertically, not even just horizontally, but all around us, it's going to take some creativity. Yeah. It's going to take some format changes. It's going to take some people that are willing to take some risks and are willing to fail at some things because, hey, we haven't really done this before. Yeah. And I love that you guys are tapping into that and making space. Again, the myth of organic diversity in the same way that we maybe talk to that on a racial basis or in a cultural basis, even in terms of modes of ministry. Yeah. We can't just assume, and we talked about this on the episode with Brian Sanders and Catherine Ng, a microchurch movement down in Tampa. And we talked about that church systems and systems in general are almost like develop their own immune systems, where when something foreign to that comes, they perceive it as a threat. Yeah. Because honestly, it is. Yeah. And in the same way, when we're actively praying through how can we be reaching our community? How can we be fulfilling the Great Commission? How can we be loving our neighbor and loving our world and loving God? If we've done that a certain way, there are systemic forces moving in that direction. You could even call them principalities. The Bible doesn't just say principalities are negative. It says the witness of the church is actually going to speak to those principalities and those kind of first things that from which other things flow. And sometimes our systems, we need to preach to those systems and say, hey, we need to do things differently if we want a different result. We need to not just wait for things to organically evolve out of what we've always done. And that's part of my journey, even with Praise Hands, is moving here to the South, as listeners of the show would know. Coming from California, it was the least churched area in the country. And I knew that I was leaving that area and coming to one of the most churched areas in Tennessee here. And I didn't realize that I was also leaving one of the least racially segregated and going to one of the most racially segregated. And I also didn't realize that wherever the adjective Christian is used, that connotes greater degrees of racial and economic segregation than the secular counterparts of those industries, whether it's publishing, whether it's music, whether it's movies or education or church, religious gatherings. There is unfortunately a history there. And when it comes to being able to just really break that mold, I realized that, wow, I've got to do some studying, because as a leader, like I had led ministries at that point, but I realized if I'm just going to go off of what I know and the limited perspective that I have, I'm, along with my generation, is probably just going to say, well, let's take last generation and try to improve it a little bit. Yeah. Let's just make it better. I mean, as long as we make it better, we're headed in the right direction, right? But that's like, taking, a number and saying, well, let's just multiply it by 1.1. But if the number that you're multiplying it by wasn't even the right number to begin with, and I'm not meaning to dishonor the people that have come behind us, because there have been many saints who have done many amazing things, but over the course of 2,000 years, it's easy to sometimes lose sight of certain things, and even not even that the things we're doing are bad, but they can just become, myopic, and they can become so focused on our cultural moment that we can lose that perspective, even the geographical, the cultural, the chronological perspective across generations. And when we, I think, spend the time to do the work and understand the bigger picture, I think that can help us avoid the trap of just falling into the last generation times 1.1. And I love what you're doing. I love the vision that you guys have to be intentional about that, to say, how can we innovate? How can we do something new here? And I think you're the perfect guy for the job.
Well, thank you. Well, yeah, and I think you're touching on some great things, and I think the one thing that we have to always remember is that being risk takers, whether it's in the space of trying to be the most like racially, ethnically diverse population that you can be, whether it's being like people that are coming from all the span of the social economic spectrum that there is, whatever that looks like, from like education backgrounds and non-education backgrounds, however you're trying to create diversity and inclusion and just differentness in your space, like it takes risk. And we're part of a risky movement. And we're also a part of a movement, not something that is stagnant. I think some people think, oh, we're supposed to be stagnant. We're supposed to finally arrive at a destination. Like we're always on the go. We're always moving. We're always, even if the waters are calm, even when I was reading, I was reading that story tonight, even about how Jesus calmed the waters, and some people, they were so nervous, full of fear, because they were in these like crazy, storms, and it was rapids everywhere. And he calmed out and said, calm the waters. And they got on to where they needed to go. But even when the waters are still, they're still moving. It didn't say like, okay, and the waters stopped completely and they were just like there. It's like, no, you still have to keep going towards the destination. Yes, there's going to be turbulence. Yes, there's going to be times where you're like, I don't know where we're going. I don't know. I feel this feels weird. And it's like, but that's okay. That means you're maybe up to something. Yeah. And that means that you need to keep going, keep trusting it. Okay, like I had this prayer and I'm living into this prayer of like, we want to move in this direction. That means, okay, I gotta like take some risk. Yeah. Take some risk. And as we were saying on the podcast, it's like, I don't like, if I want to change my eating habit, I'm going to be feeling the groaning pains of wanting to eat break and bake cookies. I want to eat those all the time, but it's like, no, I said I'm going to eat kale all the time. So it's like, that is a change. And that change pain and discomfort comes with changing sometimes. Yeah. Sometimes changes are easy. Sometimes it's super easy and it's lovely, but we've got to remember that we're supposed to be risk takers. We're supposed to be pioneers and stay being pioneers. We get so comfortable. We want to make our churches the most comfortable place. And I'm not saying comfort is bad, but it's
not the ultimate goal.
That's not the goal. That's not the goal. Yes, we want a roof over our head, and we want the chairs and the light, and we want that stuff to work. Yes, but it's like that. That's my seat. I don't care where your seat is. You don't need a seat. Stand up. It's only an hour. We're only here for a couple hours. Stand the whole time. Like, what do you sit down for? You sit down all week. You're like, come on. Like, what are you talking about?
Man. I remember going to Boston and seeing, I think it was like, I don't know if it was the church that like Paul Revere like did the lantern thing in. It was like one of these historic churches. And I think this was a thing back then where they literally had, it was almost like cubicles. Yeah. And they had families' names on it. And it was like, this is your cubicle. This is where you sit. And I can kind of imagine that it probably wasn't something too different than that in Philadelphia, that Richard Allen was not allowed to sit with his white brothers and sisters and worship with them around. And it just kind of goes to show you, like, those are two fruits from the same tree of, me wanting to be comfortable above all else, and me excluding people because of that comfort. And I think really asking some hard questions, taking some risks, like you mentioned, and making some daring moves like you guys are doing is really the right thing for this next generation. And that's why we love to feature people like yourselves on this show, and these creative cross-cultural solutionists who are really making a dent in the world. So yeah, Patrick, thank you for sharing that. Thank you for the amazing work that you're doing. Well, I'm looking forward to hearing how things go.
Yeah. And congrats on 50 episodes. That is incredible. 50 episodes. You did it. And I can't wait to hear 50 more. Robby, you're doing such great work. I feel like I can't wait to read the books you're going to put out, because I know that there's books cooking up in that brain of yours. We just can't and know that you're doing good work, and stay the course, my friend. Thank you so much.
Thank you, brother. Well, we have someone else that's just hopping on here, Patrick. Thank you.
All right, peace,
brother. Let's see. It looks like we've got Lex the Advocate here. Let's see. Lexi, are you popping on?
What's up?
Hello. How's it going?
Hey.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
We just had Patrick Chappell hop off, and we got to have a great conversation just about kind of what he's up to. He's doing some incredible things. They're got a new church plant, some innovative forms of ministry, and perfect timing. You're here.
Yeah, awesome. I'm sad I missed him though. I love Patrick. He's great.
Yeah, for sure. Do you know him personally?
We like bumped into each other.
Okay.
I helped their church out with something. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's right. Okay. Yeah. So cool. Well, it's great to see you, and it's great to have you pop on here. Thanks for celebrating with us for these 50 episodes. You were, let's see, your episode is episode 5, and you were the first co-host of a Praise Hands podcast episode on episode 4 with Barrett Ward. And so you've been there from the beginning. I still remember, I think it was the first time you and I connected. We just ended up talking about some sort of like conscious capitalism thing. And I was like, man, we got to chat about this on the podcast. And just to what I did with Patrick, and I'll do with you as well, is I kind of gave like an overview of what we chatted through, and just so people can remember, like, oh, that's that person. This was episode 5, sex trafficking, a survivor's story. And Lexi shared her story of, as a teenager, was it?
As a child.
As a child.
Yeah, 9 to 12. Yeah,
being a victim of sex trafficking. And I would encourage you to check that episode out for some perspective on the issue. And we got to have just a lot of real conversation about your story and about how you see that playing into our world today, and including the episode we had with Barrett, where that is all tied in, not just with the sex side of trafficking, it could be in the farming, it could be in the all sorts of forced labor for brick making things in India, and it affects even the products that we buy today. And you're really an expert in this field of conscious capitalism and the consumer awareness for supply chains and all that. And so that's a little refresher for folks. But first of all, how's everything going? What's new?
Oh man, well, let me explain my T-shirt, because I realize it's backwards on the screen, but it says Trafficking Hub, not Pornhub. It's in the same logo.
Okay.
Because I joined a team of abolitionists that are working to shut down Pornhub for crimes against humanity, really, for a lot of things that have been going on there that are sex trafficking, torture. I mean, it's absolutely insane what's been going on in there. So I've really pivoted and like really just like intensely jumped back into the anti, sex trafficking world. So that's where I'm at now, and working to really make some huge changes, especially 2021, as a lot of you probably know, Section 230 of the Communication Decency Act is like up for a lot of revisions, and there's just lots of conversations going on about.
I never thought about that connection from the issue of sex trafficking to that specific. I've thought a lot about the code in terms of like free speech and things like that, but I'm really fascinated by that.
Yeah. So one of the big issues that we run into when we have survivors that have either been their trafficking experience was recorded and uploaded to a porn tube site like Pornhub, or revenge porn, all these different issues that are really rampant in our culture. When they approach the companies or try to get something taken down or try to seek justice, they, like a lot of other big tech companies, kind of hide under that 230, like, well, we're not responsible. Sorry. You're just going to have to figure it out, which is just completely unacceptable. And as things have unraveled with Pornhub, and we're seeing a very similar, pattern with all porn tube sites, is the repression of anyone that is victimized, and even systems to like deter them from approaching them, just straight up ignoring people. I mean, it's just horrible what's been going on. So with there's just a lot of things up in the air legislatively. And one of the things that we're really focusing on in 2021 is how can we best protect children from being exposed to pornography, like at all, period. But there's this really big issue with kids being exposed way too early. We're seeing the average age of exposure going down and down and down. We actually just collected like over 300 stories of people who were exposed early to pornography, and how that affected their life. And it just ravages people's lives, especially when they're exposed, 8, 9, 10, sometimes as young as 5. I've got stories like 4 and 5-year-olds being exposed because they typed something into Google and it populated pornography, which is not even how Google is really supposed to work, but there's a lot of problems there. So we're just kind of shining a light on all of these issues, and we're just blatantly bringing it to the forefront. I work for an organization now called Exodus Cry, and so part of the way we do that is through films. So we've got some really gnarly films coming out this next year. Some of them are going to be pretty easy for people to watch, but we've got some more coming down later in the year that are really intense. I'm super excited though, because it really is necessary to uncover what is really going on in the world, especially the worlds that we're not privy to in our Christian bubble circles or conservative circles. And because of that, evil gets to rule and to continue to grow and to flourish. And if we keep our heads in the sand, then we're just helping it along. So I'm really excited about the work we're getting to do and all the things that we're getting to uncover. And I'm getting to kind of tap into like legislation and policy, and I'm getting to even come alongside some survivors that are seeking justice and walk with them through that legal process. And
wow.
Yeah.
So on the public policy, can you explain just even a little more detail for people who might not be familiar with Section 230, exactly just what that piece of legislation says and why that's specifically, impacting?
Yeah. And so Section 230 is part of the internet laws that were created in 1996. And that was the last time any law has been created for around the internet, which obviously back in 1996, the things they were concerned about was certain materials being talked about or passed around on message boards, which is essentially like a really old version of Reddit that didn't function very well and was really ugly and clunky. And obviously, like, technology has exploded. The internet has exploded. We carry it with us all the time. Back then, we did not. And nothing has been updated since then, which is just a humongous miss, obviously. And so back then, they weren't even thinking about the potential for technology. So the law was written in a way, unknowing that search engines were ever even going to be a thing, unknowing that social media was ever going to be a thing. And so that's, the big issue that connects to a lot of different issues that we see just overall in big tech and in media and all these different spaces that touches. So obviously that legislation doesn't necessarily address sex trafficking or adult explicit materials or anything like that. However, we're looking at all different types of legislative options to protecting children from exposure and making sure that when people are victimized, that they can hold those companies accountable. And essentially the reason why it's a problem, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that Section 230 essentially says, like, traditionally media companies would have to like declare themselves to be like a publisher. Like, we are going to take responsibility for whatever we are going to be profiting from. Like, if it's on our in our universe of things and we are monetizing it, we are also going to take responsibility for that. And then on the other side, you can go and say, well, I don't want to be like a publisher. I want to be maybe more of like a neutral platform where it's just like, hey, I'm not
discriminating. It's just like whatever's on here is on here. And I'm not going to be making decisions and potentially value judgments in terms of what should and shouldn't be on there. And Section 230 essentially gave an exemption for internet related companies to be able to get the best of both worlds, in that they are able to monetize content, but then also censor it at their discretion with little to no accountability. And so that I never made that connection with the sex trafficking issue. And now, what are your thoughts? You and I have talked a little bit about this in terms of the current cancel culture. And even in particular, I've been hearing things that Facebook has banned certain groups and pages that are actually talking about sex trafficking. What are your thoughts on that? Is that something that you're seeing?
Honestly, it's as far as the censoring and different issues like that, it is not something that I've seen or that we have run into.
Okay.
Our page has exploded. Our following has exploded. Engagement has exploded in the last year. Not saying that it doesn't happen. But I think if anything, there's been like strange things where, we do a post and it gets like, I think this has probably happened to a lot of us at some point. There's like a CDC thing where it's like,
sure.
I didn't say anything about coronavirus. What are you talking about? I think it's just like weird hiccups like within their system that sometimes cause people's pages to get shut down for other reasons. But so it's not something that I personally have experienced, that our organization has experienced. We have experienced a lot of attacks, really, and the media, really coming for us, especially pretty far left media, and the ability for people to just kind of conjure up a lot of things and say kind of whatever they want, like it's like a 25-year-old right out of college thinks that they know everything there is to know about our organization and our work, and they just spout off, and then it's like the gospel, which is crazy. That's been really wild to navigate. I've gotten like baptized by fire in the PR world, jumping into this role. But so that's been really wild. And just the, people finding like the personal value systems of members of our team and then applying maybe those different issues that they stand on to the organization when we don't address the only human rights issue that we're addressing is sex trafficking and sexual exploitation. Nothing else, never have, nor will we ever.
Right.
But, I think it's kind of part of this cancel culture thing, just taking some things and spreading it really far. And nothing even that's that offensive. It's just things like certain people are, pro-life and stuff like that, so it's not like anyone's saying that they're for something as absurd as like the like
trafficking kids, for example.
Right, exactly, trafficking kids, for example, right. When it's actually been wild, there's been there's like a spokesperson for Pornhub that has been quoted saying that essentially she's fine with pedophilia and she has children and all of these things. And that isn't alarming. And we're okay with that company, but we're not okay with the organization who has Christians working in it and running it, who have a certain belief system, even though that has nothing to do with our actual work. So it's been really interesting to navigate.
Yeah. One of the things that obviously we're about here at Praise Hands is creative cross-cultural Christianity. And in the cross-cultural part, there is such a strong force strong incentive to push people away, that particularly not like if I'm going to show my artistic skills or lack thereof, but like, let's say if I'm like the color red, like I probably am not going to have a problem with the color green. Like it's so far away, I don't feel like it's in my turf. But the moment it's like, oh, you're like a persimmon, that's kind of in my neighborhood, we tend to like really forcefully want to box it out and say like, I'm not that, I'm not that, I'm not that, and be really even violent about enforcing that, because we don't want to be associated with that. We don't care if the green people are doing that, because my reputation is not at risk for that. But the moment people get closer and closer to me, I need to really, get a hold of that, so that way I don't become associated with those people. And I've read an article recently that talked about, like, I think it was called like some term like secondary association risk, and it was talking about this in the context of church unity. And specifically, what it was saying was, it was asking the question, on what grounds, even within the church, do we have license for like distancing from people or disassociating versus not? And it was saying like, like we should only, really care the most about essentials. But what about when people don't agree about what the essentials are and not essentials? And so this concept of like the secondary association came up, and it's basically this, where if I'm, let's say, a pastor at such and such church, and then I associate with that pastor, and then if that pastor does something that I don't approve of, or if that pastor even associates with somebody else that people that I'm associated with don't approve of, then am I going to dissociate from this person because I don't want to get lumped in with that? And I think that as Christians, we should be the people that are the most okay with being misunderstood. And if you look at the life of Jesus, he, like, everybody was like, oh yeah, maybe he's one of us. Oh wait, he's talking to those people, so he's definitely not one of us, I guess, because he's talking to those people. And it really threw people for the loop. There's these different, tribes essentially that, he was associating with. And I think that it's so important, as believers, that, we're okay. Like, the pastors at the Belonging have talked about, Judas, like, was in Jesus's midst, and Jesus, like, probably had a pretty good idea what Judas was going to do, but he still kept him around. As Christian leaders, are we willing to take that risk for people and to still be in community with them, even though they're flawed, even though we feel like, man, my reputation might get hurt by this? Are we willing to still unite on the areas that we can unite? And I remember back actually in college, we, as a couple of Christian leaders, we started and spearheaded something. It was basically an anti-trafficking coalition on our whole campus. And now it wasn't branded as a Christian thing, but we were the leaders in that then reached out to all the other organizations on campus and said, hey guys, this should be an issue we can all agree on. Let's work together. So we worked together. We did a human trafficking awareness week. We hosted a movie showing on this. This is back in like 2008 or something like that. And that was just one of the most amazing things, to see the whole campus come together. Now, in that coalition, there were people that, like, we would vastly disagree on like a lot of issues, and they would vastly disagree with us on a lot of issues. But we were able to put those things aside to be able to move together on an issue that we did agree with. And I think one of the things that's concerning to me, and, to be fair, the church has certainly been a big source of cancel culture. We haven't called it that, but this is not something where this is just like a one directional thing where it's like, only happening from other people to the church or whatnot. But one of the dangers that can happen with that is we lose out on the ability to collaborate and move forward with shared interests that are a win-win for us. And I think that's such a loss. And I hope that whoever's listening to this, you're inspired to connect with people that might not look like you, might not even believe the same way as you. Like, that doesn't mean you are sacrificing like who you are to do that. You can bridge build across that. Yeah, like, people might not understand. You might get flack for it. You might lose donors for it. But is it the right thing to do?
Right. And that's happened to this organization. The last film we put out is called Liberated, and it's actually on Netflix, called Liberated, the Sexual Revolution. It's kind of about spring break and hookup culture. And prior to that, the majority of our base was pretty conservative Christians. And because there wasn't a focus in there of conversion, we lost the largest donor we've ever had. That's something I really respect about our founder, is that he's like when he feels that we need to go a certain direction, like that's what's happening. But it's been really wild, like kind of towing this line of being in between, because that's, obviously sex trafficking and protecting children, like you're right, everyone can agree on that. But then you get into these nuances, and then all of a sudden people just, will flight from either side. And it's been really interesting, and it'll be really interesting as we navigate like the rest of the year, because the majority of our following is still pretty conservative Christians. And a lot of things that we're going to put out like is going to be deemed inappropriate, or it's going to be or it's going to be felt that we're not taking like a more extreme hard stance on this thing or that thing. But we're out here on mission to be effective.
Right.
And
on this issue.
Right.
And if that's what it takes to move this issue forward,
right,
you're not going to be doing everything at once on all the issues.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, you're 100% right. And we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Well, Lexi, thank you so much for sharing all that. I'm really excited to see what comes of all your efforts this next year. And we'll be praying for you, because we know that, you're on the front lines definitely on this issue. And it impacts so many other issues that we deal with on a day-to-day basis, but don't even realize are connected. All the different goods that we consume and just the culture that we live in. So yeah, thank you for the work that you're doing. It's great to see you.
Yeah. Good to see you too.
I think we have somebody hopping on here.
Awesome.
You can, it's fun. It's like a surprise to see who's going to pop on, and it'll be fun to introduce you guys as well.
Cool.
Let's see. We've got Brooke Hempell. Hello, Brooke.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going good. So Lexi Smith is here as well. We've been chatting for a while. One of the things that I've been excited for tonight is the opportunity to introduce different guests to each other, and just so people kind of know who's doing what. And so Lexi is in the anti-sex trafficking space. She works with an organization called Exodus Cry. And so they've got some powerful stuff coming out this next year, some documentaries and some film projects. And they are like so on the front lines with this stuff, just having some like public policy conversations, dealing with direct, like some of these actual like pornographic organizations, like just like straight conversations with them. And so that's what she's doing. And Brooke is, let me know if I get your title right, but like the vice president of research at Barna Group. Is that correct? And so Brooke is the master of the data, and she's got a huge heart for racial justice, church unity, and has really done a whole lot of work in mining through a lot of, probably like millions of pages of data to be able to help people like us understand like what is actually happening in our world today, what is actually happening in the church. And she's brilliant. So it's good to see you, Brooke.
Good to see you, and good to meet you, Lexi.
And Lexi, you're welcome to stay on as long as you want, and but no pressure. And we're just going to keep chatting here. So Brooke, so just to give our listeners a reminder, because we have all these different guests, and it's easy to like, wait, who is that person? And I already gave a little bit of an introduction, but the episode that you were on was at the beginning of season 3, and it was called Data and Diversity, a Call to Dig Deeper. You're in Atlanta. You are doing, like I said, a lot of amazing work with Barna Group, but then also locally in the metropolitan area of Atlanta. You're involved in your community. You're involved with, racial justice issues. You recently started a podcast. So that's kind of the reminder of who Brooke Hempell is. And so I would love to just hear, hey, what has life been like for you since, I guess, a little over a year ago when your episode aired?
Yeah, gosh, a lot has happened. I just see how God has prepared us to be able to share relevant information in this moment. We've been collecting data and doing research on some of these issues on race and justice, and the different intertwined social and civic issues related to those. And, as 2020 came about, and we've got COVID happening, and we've got racial protest happening, and we've got church disruption, and we've got all these things, political environment just kind of exploding, we were just so thankful to have been immersed in this research for the year or two prior, so that we had something to draw upon. We could take a perspective on what was happening and really help others kind of navigate. And then, as you said, I mean, for me, it became a personal thing where I started my podcast by saying, as a researcher, my job is to remain unbiased and to be able to report the data and the facts that are in it. But when I look at these particular issues, it's impossible for me to remain completely unbiased. My heart is just drawn to respond. And so I've really dug in even further and been able to get involved in a number of different social justice organizations and political activism organizations this year. Especially being in Georgia, there was a lot going on. So I was excited to be involved in that.
Yeah. And tell us the name of your podcast and maybe give us like a summary of why you started it and really what you see happening through it.
Yeah, it's called Race and Redemption, and it's designed really for what I would say people at the beginning of a journey who are just discovering, especially white Christians who are just discovering some of the realities of racial injustice in our country, and they have questions and they want to, react or respond in a good way, but just need a lot of information and they need to know what best to do. And so it really gives them a primer on some of the issues, and we try to cover a diversity of issues, but then helps people move from those questions to change. So now what? And to really go through that process of engaging. So Race and Redemption, it's been a little over a year. No, not quite a year. It's been about a year that we've been doing the podcast, and we're in our second season right now. This is a really fun time because the first year we really centered the experience of African Americans in our country and in different scenarios. And now we're actually broadening that, covering lots of different racial issues and also covering white Christians who are responding and telling their story. So we're really excited to be able to hear listeners who've been listening for the last season responding and saying, hey, this is what I've done in reaction to this moment. And I'd love to just, get some encouragement on how to continue in that.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. I love that there are different voices speaking into the space of, let's say, racial reconciliation or racial justice within the church. And all of them are needed. We need different angles on what's going on. So I love that. We've got somebody else that just popped on here. It's kind of like this fun, like surprise thing. You don't know who's going to pop in. I just sent out, a message to everybody. And so let's see who it is. And you guys might not even know each other.
Oh, I do know DJ. We have actually connected over email and phone and whatnot.
And have you guys ever met like face to face? Obviously, this is
not
Zoom.
In person. No, this is really fun.
That's
you've got your orange party going.
Oh yes, that's my color.
So
Brooke, are you still in Ventura?
No, I'm in Atlanta. So we still have an office in Ventura, so I get there sometimes, but I'm in Atlanta.
How fun. So we were just chatting through Brooke's journey since she was on the podcast earlier last year, kind of what she's been up to. She started a new podcast called Race and Redemption, and it's been tackling a lot of these racial issues. And what we were just talking through is it's so great that there are different voices speaking to these issues, but all of them are needed. We're covering different angles on the topic. Some people are really focused on this one issue. Other people are really focused on this one issue. Others might be a little more broad. And for you, DJ, you've got some work that you've done in particular with the Asian American community, talking about issues of mental health, of shame, and really helping people sort through this. And I really appreciate the work that you're doing. And for a refresher for people, we had your episode that was on. It was called Cultural Competency, Shame, and Generosity. It was episode 22, came out in November of 2019. And we had a great time chatting. And I love just reflecting back. We're celebrating 50 episodes of the Praise Hands podcast. And I love that for me personally, I've made friends through this. Like I'm friends with both of you guys now. And just to get to find commonality on these topics, but then also keep the relationship going. It's one thing to have conversations, but if those conversations aren't producing relationships, then they're just conversations. And I can go find a random person at a park and have a conversation if I want to talk to somebody, just and have a conversation for the sake of conversation. But I love that we're getting to connect and share these passions, share resources. I know I've gone back and forth with both of you guys about like, oh, hey, here's this, DJ invited me to Clubhouse, we got to get lunch when you were visiting in Nashville a year or two ago. Actually, I think that was just a little over a year ago, right before everything started to shut down. I think you said that was like your last trip pre-COVID. And so it's just so much fun just to see how these connections happen. And DJ, I would love for you to share, and Brooke, you're welcome to hang on as long as you'd like. I'd love for you to share what you've been up to since the time of your interview on the Praise Hands podcast.
I've been just working my normal job, so it actually has been mostly uneventful, but it's been a healthy season, so I'm grateful for that. But I did launch a second podcast this January, so just 2 months ago. It's titled Generous Asian American Christians.
Cool.
So we're having a weekly conversation about money and faith and generosity and philanthropy. And apparently, as many resources as there are in terms of financial investment and financial stewardship, there's not so much on generosity. And we're discovering that it's if we can keep it as a fresh conversation, it's much more helpful, because most people are across the board. The church is known for giving at maybe 2.5%. And so that's nowhere near the tithe. So
right.
If we can inspire and inform and help people experience more freedom and joy in giving.
Yeah.
And that's been a journey for our family as well. So it's been a good growth progression for us, and so much tied into faith.
Right. I'm curious for you on this topic of generosity, what's your perspective on how the giving of the church has been impacted over this last year? Obviously, lockdowns and shutdowns and the pandemic and things like that has really affected the giving of the church. What's your perspective on how that has or maybe has not been affected in different areas?
Well, I'm going to defer to Barna Group for the expert data for that. But
you guys can maybe
from my vantage point, a smaller sample set, I've heard mixed reviews. So some communities have been impacted negatively with layoffs and deaths, and then other communities have fared well financially because there's no more commute time and they have investment in good places. And so I found, actually, I had a conversation earlier with my therapist, and it seems to us that things are just very polarized. And so some people are doing better than they did before COVID, and then some people in some churches are doing way worse. And so it hasn't left anybody the same, and it's really shaken all of us up. And so hopefully it helps people grow in faith rather than lose their faith.
Yeah, for sure. Brooke, do you have any thoughts on that? I'm sure you have a few.
Yeah. No, it's exactly right. It has been really a polarization. I mean, there's been these smaller, less resourced, often urban churches that have really, really struggled, and some have even folded. And just in terms of their physical capacity, of course, but, have not had the resources because their members were so stretched and so hurting during this moment. And then there's been other churches, larger churches that typically already had really good resources that weren't spending their funds on programs because they weren't meeting. And so all of a sudden they are quite flush with a lot of cash. And thankfully, many of them are deploying that into ministries and maybe even sharing with other churches. There was a great program earlier this year of churches helping churches. And so helping to kind of keep those smaller churches alive that just didn't have the resources or had greater need. But it really has been a disparity in the church. And it's been good where we've seen the church come together and serve each other. But it's also just been really just a time of lament of, wow, our brothers and sisters are hurting in some places where others are just doing fine, actually.
Yeah, we talked recently on an episode with Happy Danny, or Danielle Cook, who's in Atlanta with you, Brooke. And she did a social media graphic that talked about kind of 3 broadly generalizing groups of people and how they were affected by the pandemic. It showed like one group, like they're out, like as using rain as a metaphor. One group is like they're out in the cold, they're being rained on. And the pandemic has been really rough for them. The other group is like, maybe they're in like a temporary shelter and they're like, just barely making it and holding on. The other group is like in a house and like, it's almost unaffected by that. And a lot of issues that we might talk about, whether it's something like police brutality, or whether it's something like, church planning, or whether it's something like, the global health crisis that we've been going through. It's not this, homogenous thing that affects everybody the same way. And I think that's such a learning lesson. Obviously, we talk a lot about cross-cultural issues on the show. And one of the biggest just square one things is just, before you assume that other people have experienced the same issue the same way as you, just ask, wait, maybe they haven't. Maybe they have, but just don't assume, and just ask questions. See the person, and you can ask questions and not be afraid of they might disagree with you on an issue. You might disagree with them on an issue, and that's okay. But you can still ask questions and hear and validate and use that empathy muscle. So I think it's great to really be able to keep that in mind. And I love the different lanes that you two are in with these different conversations. DJ, would you share maybe your perspective in particular on this last year in your part of the world in California? How has everything been for a lot of the churches that you've been in particular in touch with, like with some of the racial justice issues? I know some of the conversations about, the quote unquote China virus. There's been some anti-Asian American racism that's happened. And I think some collaboration has come out of that. Would you speak to kind of some of those movements and conversations that you've been involved with?
Well, California supposedly has one of the tightest restriction with COVID restrictions and quarantine. So we're still in the red zone or something, where there's no dining in at restaurants, social distancing everywhere and that kind of thing. Whereas in some parts of the country now, Texas, Maryland, and 4 or 5 others are wide open. No masks are needed. So that's been California for the past year.
Right.
With a few gaps where it was a little bit looser, but just small windows of reprieve. And so everybody been stuck at home, and then once in a while the beaches get crowded, and there's some antsiness like that. But part of that keeps people from running into each other in terms of potential conflict or friction. There's exceptions in the cities because there's more density there, whether that's LA or San Francisco. But I think those are the only 2 hotspots that I've heard chatter around. And then in terms of anti-Asian racism, that's shown up in Oakland, as far as I know, and a little bit in LA. And so Clubhouse actually has been an instrumental platform for Asian Americans around the country to convene and have a space to build some solidarity and also do some fundraisers. They've raised over, I think, towards $1 million now through some gatherings and partnerships with GoFundMe to raise awareness for it and to help communities that are most affected by anti-Asian racism.
Yeah.
So for those that might not know, Clubhouse is a drop-in audio chat social network, iPhone only and invite only. It has over 10 million members, and you can't see each other, but people just talk and they hang out there for at least an hour on average. And that's kind of been a good social space for people to connect, those that have access to that. So that's been really neat. And that's also been a neat place for cross-cultural conversation, both good and a little bit tense too. So earlier today, I was in a room where there's quite a bit of drama because of misunderstanding. And then the next room was talking about multi-ethnic church and how we move forward together by first listening to each other's stories so that we have the relationship to move together.
Yeah.
And so it's a fascinating time to be in, and how we're learning to connect face-to-face online rather than face-to-face in person. So in some ways it accelerates it, but it also aggravates it because you don't have the proximity in person to really live life together. So sometimes you get good signals, but sometimes you get bad signals.
Yeah. Well, maybe a question just to get your perspective, both of your perspectives. What are you guys excited about moving forward? You know, in the work that you're doing, what's maybe if you just had to pick one thing that is just like, wow, I see that on the calendar coming up and just makes me excited every time, or I'm working on this and it really makes me come alive. What's that one thing for each of you right now?
I mean, I think I'm just enjoying being in the space that I am and just thinking of what are the next relevant topics, related to these broader diversity questions. So I'm just curious to see what God puts in front of us next. I feel like we're in a moment of people engaging in a unique way. Like, DJ, I think you were part of the Asian American Christian Collaborative that just really has spoken out very actively against some of the justice issues that have come up this year. And that's been awesome to see these cross-cultural supports happening. And so I just am excited to continue to watch the space and be able to share those stories of what's happening and continue to figure out where we have questions. So yeah, I'm feeling like this is our swim lane for me. So I'm really it's been a hard year, but also it's really beautiful to see God working through the difficult things to create new things that are good and healthy.
Yeah, that's beautiful. How about you, DJ?
Well, I've always had a bias for tech. And so we're finally at that turning point where the people of God and churches are using technology more actively. And I believe technology can connect us better together if we use it well together, instead of relinquishing it to the people that use it badly. And so if we don't use it, then only the bad people use it. If we use it well, it can bring the body of Christ together. It has brought us as the Asian American community together through something like Asian American Christian Collaborative. It's been an entirely online kind of small movement with a lowercase m that's still building. And so that's very encouraging to see. And I think using all the resources that God has given us, technically and people-wise, I think we can create a brighter and better future in the midst of a tense environment.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And you've been pioneering in that space for a while with technology and pushing people that direction. And now you kind of have a little bit of wind behind your sails and things are moving that direction. So I love that you're already positioned to be a leader in that space. Well, thank you guys both for hopping on here. It's been so fun just to not know who's going to pop on next. And it's been a blast. Thank you for also the work that you guys do. I want to share with our listeners just some exciting stuff that we have coming up. We have some guests that we haven't announced yet, but just because you've listened, we've been on for like almost an hour and 15. So if you've listened this far, you deserve to get some secret information that has not been shared yet. And I'll just tell you the interviews that we have lined up, and some of these are actually already recorded. We have Rich Velotis out of New York City. His book, The Deeply Formed Life, is just really a great collection of thoughts on a lot of issues that are really important, and with an emphasis on spiritual formation to becoming more like Jesus. So that is going to be an incredible interview. We've got an interview lined up with Duke Kwon and Gregory Thompson. Their book is coming out on reparations, I think in April. And Duke's talk on reparations at Q Conference, and I'm forgetting what year it was game changing for me in terms of just my awareness of some of these issues. And honestly, if that talk didn't happen, I don't know if Praise Hands would even be around, just because it was that inspirational for me. So I'm really honored to have him and Greg on the show. Greg's done some incredible work as well, and studied a ton of Martin Luther King Jr. I think that was like his master's or PhD or something in studying Martin Luther King. And lastly, we have an interview lined up with John Perkins. And so it's just going to be such an honor to have him on this show to talk about, really, at the end of the day, hey, it's whatever he wants to talk about. I might prepare questions. I don't have my hopes up to be able to get any of them in. It's just whatever he wants to share. I'm excited to hear, and really, truly a living legend who has given it all and then some, and just keeps giving. And I got a chance to chat with him once, and just you'll never meet a person that just makes you feel more like $1 million. and just somebody that has been through it and just has the joy of the Lord all over him, leaking out to all the people around him. And so we're really excited to have, all three of them on the show. And it's just been a great season already, this season 4, and more to come. Some of those, I'm not sure if all of those will be released in this season. Some of them might be in the fall. So cliffhanger, sorry guys. But I do want to announce we are going to be doing, to celebrate our 50th episode, we're going to be doing a giveaway, a 3-pack of books. Everybody loves books. We've got The Color of Compromise from Jemar Tisby. This is an incredible summary of just the American church's involvement in not just complying with, but even pushing forward racism and the even painting a path forward for what redemption could look like from that. We've got The Next Worship, and this is from Sandra Marie von Opstal, talking about really some issues of justice and worship, and really what this next generation of worship can look like in a multi-ethnic sense. And then we've got Reading While Black from one of our guests, Esau McCaulley. You're going to love this book. He goes really deep. He's a student of N.T. Wright. You can check his episode out. I think it was, it was last season, and it was called Why There's Still Hope Beyond 2020. And hey, we're here in 2021, so we made it. But that was in September, episode 41. And I would encourage you to check this book out if you don't win it. To enter to win this, what we are asking is for you to email in either through the website or email praisehandspodcast@gmail.com and share a testimony of how your life has been affected by Praise Hands and by the Praise Hands podcast. And we're going to be sorting through those. This episode is going to release tomorrow, March 11th. So let's say submit it by March 18th, which is the day before the next episode. So by Wednesday, March, I'm getting my dates wrong. By the 18th would be, I guess, next Thursday. So yeah, send it in sometime before then. We'll announce the winner. And again, just a testimony of how your life has been impacted, and we'll select at random a winner, and we will mail you all 3 of those books. So DJ, Brooke, thanks for being on. To all of you listeners who have been following with us these last couple of years, thank you for your support. For our monthly supporters, for our one-time people that have participated in the year-end giving campaign, we can't tell you how much we appreciate you. To all the people who have sent in stories already of how you've been impacted and running with some of these things, you inspire me to keep going. To our team who has really done all the just behind the scenes uploading, distributing, editing, email, scheduling, contacting guests. People don't realize until you actually run a podcast how much goes into it to really put a high level of quality into it. So I just want to thank our team so much. I mean, I hope I don't miss somebody, but from the beginning, Emily, you really believed in this vision right from the beginning. Emily Dietz. We've got just people. I mean, Scott Steers has been a great friend in all of this. We've got, I'm totally going to miss people, but Nicole Adams helping with this distribution, Simone helping with everything, Mackenzie helping with everything. I'm excited to have you co-host an episode soon. Different people that have helped out on the research team, from Hector to Matt. I'm definitely going to miss people. You are all loved, but really, really appreciate everybody who has just been such a Jay helping with the episode descriptions. You guys put in such hard work, and really, really appreciate you, and honored to be running this race with you guys for the sake of the Lord, and really the glory that He is due, to be able to help the church move towards a place of creative, cross-cultural Christianity. And just what a blessing and what an honor it is to get to serve the Lord, to be able to talk through these topics. And I'm inspired to keep going. I think we'll do some more episodes. So DJ, Brooke, great to see you both. All you listeners.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Hallelujah. Thank
you. Amen. Well, we'll see all you guys. This was a surprise episode. Nobody knows it's coming out, but we'll be right back with you on Thursday, the 18th, for episode 51. And I'll tell you who it's going to be with. It's with Josh Davis and Jae Woo Kim. Also from the Atlanta area, a lot of Atlanta connections from Proskuneo Ministry. These guys are world-renowned experts in multicultural worship, and said so many mind-blowing things that you're going to love it. So God bless all of you guys. We'll see you next episode.
Bye.
So at this point in the night, I thought we were done. Then I got a couple texts from Jackie The Educator and Ricky Ortiz saying, hey, can we hop back on? And so I said, you know what, let's keep the party going for you guys. So we will jump back in. I thought we were done, but I was wrong. Jackie.
How's it going?
Hey.
So sorry, man. I literally turned off this work phone. It was a crazy day. And then I forgot I had something that I just scheduled with you yesterday. I was like done for the day.
Oh my gosh. Well, I won't keep you long. It's been so fun. We've gotten to hear from, I think, like, I don't know, 5 or 6 different alumni from the show. And
Awesome.
I think I just got another text that we have somebody else hopping on now too. So
Sweet.
it's been fun. I love just the spontaneity of, like, you never know who's going to hop on next. So what I've been doing with each guest is basically like reminding people who they are, and then kind of asking, hey, what's new. So so to remind everybody, Jackie the Educator, we had you on episode 8 in season 1 in 2019, and we talked about hurt, hustle, and healing in Black America. And then after that, we did 2 different episodes that were from BCI, which is Black Christian Influencers' first in-person gathering ever, right? That was the first one?
Yes, man, that seems like yesterday.
Mm-hmm. And so that was in Atlanta, and we filmed a couple as a part of the breakout session for you guys at that conference. I think it was the Impact Conference or something like that. And then we were able to use those for the podcast episodes, had some great conversations about social media, authenticity and faith, and then music and mission outside Sunday morning. And a story that I'll share that I don't even know if you know, Jackie, the time that we first connected, it was over Instagram. And that was during this first season where I was just kind of getting this podcast off the ground, doing, a lot of the stuff myself. And really, like, I was honestly kind of at the end of my rope, like, man, Lord, I want to get like the right type of guests here. There's a lot of people that have a lot of things to say, but not all of them are maybe going about it the right way, maybe not with a heart of reconciliation. And I'm like, Lord, you got to connect me with the right people, because I don't want to just have people on just to fill space in episodes. And I was literally like on my face praying, and I can remember where I was in our room. And like, the only thing that I felt like in terms of direction was just like, go and on Instagram and reach out to Jackie the Educator. And so I went on Instagram and sent you a message. It was like midnight or something. And I was like, hey, kind of shot in the dark. We've never really connected. And then you like responded back right away. And I think we recorded the interview like the next day.
Yeah, I remember that.
And so I love just how just that happened out of a moment of desperation and prayer. And then fast forward, we got to do these episodes, and I was saying to some of the last people that were on the call here, like, I love that I've become good friends with so many people that started off just as people that I was interviewing on this, and, have become lifelong relationships. And, and even to the point where I've been able to be a part of your board at Black Christian Influencers and just see God just do so many amazing things. So, so I want to just hear from your perspective, what's been going on these last 2 years for you?
Wow, man, Robby, it just seems like yesterday, though. It's gone so quick. But yeah, for me, it's just been continual growth and development just of my craft. Obviously, social media and media in general just changes so much. I mean, not to mention a pandemic that has made it like completely a different world that we live in. And so, right now, the adjustment that we had to make was really to be a community online, because we didn't have an option to meet in person anymore. So our goal was to start meeting in person more, kind of like what we did at the conference. But, with the pandemic, we had to really kind of dig into the virtual community world. And it honestly has been a blessing, because I've been able to establish relationships and just build on things that, I just never could have imagined, the type of people that I'm meeting now. So it's just really good, man. I have no complaints, and I'm just excited to see where God is taking us next. Our chapters are being developed now in different cities, and we're really starting to expand. So things are going really good.
That's amazing. So when you and I first met, like, how many followers do you think Black Christian Influencers had on Instagram, and how many does it have now?
Oh boy. So when we first started, we connected was maybe less than like 8,000. And now I think we're almost at 53K. So, it's just crazy how much, has happened, and our membership has grown so much, even with you being on our board and, helping out with that process and really getting data. We've now garnered at least over, I want to say 2,000 data on members that we have in our organization. So it's just really exciting just to see like how much momentum is still happening to this day.
Wow, that's incredible. And you have stewarded it so well. Like I mentioned, I've been looking for guests that really have that heart of reconciliation. And, you've really put into practice what you preach and have reached out, building that, amazing tribe, but then also building across, your tribe into other parts of the body of Christ that I just love the work that you're doing. I think it's really significant. So thank you so much for what you're doing. We had another guest alumni, and I'm excited to introduce you guys to each other just so you can know who each other are. And that's one of the fun things about kind of not knowing who's going to hop on at any one moment. But we've got Ricky Ortiz here. He is in New York City. Actually, he's not in New York City right now. He's based in New York City, but he is where, Ricky?
I am in Hawaii at the moment for at least 2 more weeks. And I've been here for 2 weeks already. So it has been great. So yeah, thanks for the text, Robby, and sorry for being so late on board.
No, you're good. I'm sure you had something way more enjoyable than this if you're in Hawaii now. So to introduce you guys to each other, Ricky, we've got Jackie The Educator on here. She is the founder of Black Christian Influencers, an amazing friend, amazing leader in the body of Christ who is really empowering, starting in the Black community, but really, we'll be moving beyond that, influencers to be able to really not only grow their social media platforms, but really expand their influence for the kingdom of God. And she's a brilliant general that has got some incredible vision. And so that's Jackie. Ricky is doing some amazing work in New York City. His church, Meta Church, they've got a unique situation. They're really bridging a lot of socioeconomic gaps, a lot of ethnic gaps, a lot of even just different ways of doing church in terms of like the funding mechanisms and just the way that they build community and measure their success is super unique. And for our listeners, you might remember we had Ricky's episode. It was called Rethinking Urban Church Planning, and it was released a little over a year ago. So Ricky, one, it's good to see you, and Jackie, you're welcome to hang on as long as you want. And Ricky, tell us what you've been up to other than, tanning on the beach for the last 2 weeks. What have you been up to in this last year since you were on the Praise Hands podcast?
Yeah, Jackie, before you go, great to meet you. It'd be great to connect. I'll follow along, at least certainly on Instagram, and then maybe we can touch base. So I don't want to, keep you on too long if you need to run, but great to connect with you.
You too, definitely.
Yeah,
I'll connect you guys.
The year, I'm sure. Okay, awesome. And I'm sure the year, as everyone has said, has been kind of up and down, and maybe probably for many down and challenging, all sorts of challenges. But for us in New York, it was certainly for the better part of 2-3 months. We were the COVID epicenter globally. So we certainly faced quite a bit of challenges, at least initially, and then kind of coming out of that. In terms of what I have been up to or what we've been up to, we've been trying to, really think through how do we do our mission? How do we fulfill our mission in a physically distanced, world and in a maybe apprehensive culture, which is what New York has become in terms of social engagement and connection and I don't know how much time I have, Robby, but I'll share kind of just a thing. I've been in pastoral ministry.
Yeah, please do.
15 years, I guess, vocationally, in some capacity or another. And, one of the most bizarre things at the start of COVID for our church, we're based on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. And one of the most bizarre things was that, at the start of COVID, we had just an influx of financial resource pouring in from all over the world. People who were supporting our ministry because like, hey, you're in the thick of it. We want to help, which was great. But it was the first and only time I've ever experienced this pastorally was that we had more resource than we had people to actually do ministry. We had enough resource for the ministry, but we had no people to do ministry because our church, which is based in Manhattan, and on the border for the Upper East Side and East Harlem, we saw, 65% of our people actually disperse and return back to like their places of origin, their communities of origin. At one point we counted, we were a church at the time at 55 people, and somehow we were dispersed among 16 different states and 2 countries, counting US and elsewhere, the UK. And so it was kind of crazy to, rethink, how do we do, and we were so focused on doing localized ministry in our neighborhood. How do all of a sudden now, when this significant opportunity presented itself, we had no people locally to do the ministry. And so we were in some ways kind of handcuffed initially anyway. So we found some other, ways like that. And then one of the things we just resorted to was like, listen, we've got all these resources, rather than sitting on them because of the restrictions in terms of gatherings and spaces and people's apprehension because of what we saw in our city. We just became far more apt to say, hey, we'll just release the resources financially, whether it's rental assistance, utilities, or just giving you a check for a certain amount of money. Which is, in my church experience has kind of been, churches have not done that. We've opted to pay bills because, you don't know if you can trust the person or whatever. The reason is, we just said, doesn't matter. Let's put the resources in the hand of the people. What they do with it is up to them, but it makes no sense for it to just sit in our account. So that was, in terms of immediate kind of the urgent need and trying to meet needs in our neighborhood, that was significant. And then, I was just thinking about this the other day, actually listening to your podcast and the episode that we recorded. I was listening to a more recent episode, but then thinking about our episode, it's like, we're actually now in the process because, 60% of our church has permanently moved because they've been able to work remote or whatever. And so they've just left New York City. So in a lot of ways, we're actually going back into the basics to replant and restart Meta Church, what we've kind of termed Meta 2.0. Or because of people moving permanently from New York City, we are in essence replanting and restarting. But to be, quite candid with you, in this, what we've said is, what are the things we did well, and 1.0, if you will, and let's do that again. But then what are the things that we realized that were, in a sense, it's a gift that we can restart? Because what are the things that we feel like we didn't do well? Because again, quite honestly, COVID kind of exposed some of our vulnerabilities and weaknesses. In that, we were very much committed to localized ministry. But the number of, or the percentage, I should say, of people that left New York City because of COVID, but then actually didn't care about what was happening locally was quite alarming, particularly for me as the leader. That was never our vision. That was never our heart. And what we thought, that was never our culture. But I think it's Craig Groeschel who said, culture is both a product of what you allow and what you create. And so clearly there was some combination of that where we had kind of either allowed or created a space where it was okay to walk away from your neighbor and not wonder if your neighbor was okay to go 6-7 months and not actually think about or check in on your neighbor, your physical neighbor. And so we spent a lot of the last 6 months, really since September, really just kind of doubling down on that. What does this look like? What does this mean? How do we recommit to this? A higher level of personal accountability, interrelational accountability, as well as a higher level of ownership, individual ownership. So that's been a lot of fun. It's been a lot of hard work, but already we're starting to see the fruit of that, and the impact behind that has been really, really significant.
Wow. So it's really the season of, like you said, relaunching and asking some tough questions about, why were we not as invested as a church in this community as I thought we were? And if I'm understanding you correctly, how can we avoid that happening again? And how can we really take steps to create a culture in our church where we are truly invested in our neighbors. Am I hearing you correctly?
Yeah, 100%. And what we've said, I think on our podcast, we talked about having kind of distinctive DNA. And so what we've said even through this is that, hey, our DNA has not changed. And the thing about DNA is that it travels. It doesn't matter if you're in Goshen, Indiana, or New York. Your DNA is your DNA. The DNA you were born with is the DNA you have 30 some years later or whatever. Yeah. That's not changed.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you hit the nail on the head. It's exactly right. It's a deepening of that. It's a commitment to that and a burgeoning of it to say, if we say we care about our neighbor, just because our work says, hey, you can work remote, and so I'm going to go work at, my family's lake house, doesn't excuse you or absolve you from the word we've used is the responsibility that you have to the people God connected you to in our neighborhood, to care, to love, to serve, to remain connected, and to be in communication with.
Yeah. Wow. So what is your hope moving forward, just as you make these shifts? Obviously nobody knows what the future is going to look like, in a year or 5 or 10 years, but what would you, if you were to look back a year from now and see the cultural shifts? Obviously we can't control numbers and things like that, but in terms of your vision culturally for your church, what would that look like in terms of how the neighbors, how your church members are relating to one another and also the community?
Yeah, great question. I think, we are far less concerned. We're probably far less concerned. We weren't concerned with numbers a year ago, and we're far less concerned with them now. We've always focused on inputs versus like the outputs or the outcomes. And so what we're really looking at is kind of the peer-to-peer accountability from within the meta communities. A word that's used a lot now because of schools and the way schools are doing education are like these cohorts, which is actually a military term. It's a Roman military term. And one of the things I came across was an article last summer about the Spartan games, and now they're monetized, big prizes, commercialized type of thing. But the original idea was that nobody was a winner unless everyone crossed the finish line. So you weren't incentivized about placing first, second, or third. You were incentivized by making sure everyone crossed the line.
Yeah.
And then that was kind of the Spartan ethos was that we go to battle, but it's not about winning the battle. It's about everyone coming home. And then they had kind of their groups, which then later became the Roman military cohorts, which is now where we get our word. And so as far as culture goes, what we're seeing and what we'd hope to continue to see a year from now is that it's not myself or my wife as pastors exhorting people to step into something, but actually, Robby, you're a part of our church. And then, Aquila over here is part of our church too. And so if Aquila sees Robby's not as committed to the neighborhood or the community, that she has permission and the authority to say, hey, Robby, something's off. You're not in a condemning way, but how can we encourage each other? How can we spar, as the scriptures say, spur each other to good works?
Yeah.
In this neighborhood. And so we've kind of we've tried to, over the last 6 months, really build communities and pathways, channels for trust, community and connection, and kind of using that metaphor and speaking that, implementing that verbiage into our culture so that people can say, yeah, I'm part of this cohort, and this is what this means. And so when Amanda speaks up, I'm going to listen because I owe it to Amanda and she owes it to me. When Sebastian is stepping up, I'm going to celebrate Sebastian, and I'm going to say, you know what? Hey, Sebastian, help me learn how I can grow in this area. Help me, move forward in this as well. So I think what we're hoping for and prayerfully moving toward is that there's a lot more peer-to-peer accountability, support, and camaraderie versus just leadership to attendee or leadership to church member or whatever, kind of that traditional, far more horizontal than vertical.
Yeah, you might be interested in checking out. I already referenced this episode once earlier, but our episode on micro churches with Brian Sanders and Catherine Ng. The episode was Welcome to the Age of the Micro Church. And we released that episode about a year ago. And in that episode, they shared about Tampa Underground and their microchurch network. And specifically, and I don't know, did you listen to the episode by chance?
I didn't listen to the episode, so fill me in.
Yeah. So basically how they operate is with a combination of centralized and decentralized. And he quoted some like Harvard or MIT paper that talked about the perfect organizational structure of the 21st century is a decentralized part and a centralized part, but that the centralized part only exists to the degree that it needs to serve the decentralized part. And so they have these microchurch expressions around town that's like, this one is focused on racial justice. This one is focused on battered women. This one is focused on X, Y, and Z. And then they've got a Sunday morning expression, but there are a ton of people, maybe, I don't know what the percentage would be, but a large percentage that are like committed weekly members of the microchurches that are committed to moving a certain piece of action and cause forward, all for the cause of Christ. But then they may not even be connected with the hub, but then they can be launching new movements and new microchurches that are like issue or cause specific. And the interesting part about that model is that because the decentralized component is actually emphasized more than the centralized, that kind of forces them in a way to take the higher level of ownership. But yeah, so you may want to check them out just because they're doing like some crazy stuff in the city that is just really being the hands and feet of Jesus all over the city in unique ways. And just called the Tampa Underground, or you can check out their episode as well.
Yeah, that's really, really great because I've heard about for several years now, the Tampa Underground, probably since way back in 2012. But I missed that episode, so I have to listen to that because that's really we've taken some small steps towards something similar. So that's super great. Thank you. I'll definitely check it out.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so in closing here, what are you most excited about and expectant for? And when you look at, I asked the same question to a couple folks earlier, when you look out in this horizon of the future, what brings you hope? What brings you joy?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I speak from, pastoral church ministry point of view. Mm-hmm. And I think what we experienced at Meta is not all that dissimilar from what the majority of churches across America experienced. At least for a period of time, we've had to maybe even endure it for a longer period of time with limitations on gatherings and venue spaces and such. Mm-hmm. But what I'm speaking of is that I'm now starting to see and maybe even aspiring to believe that what took place amongst the church last year, the racial injustice, the shutdown, the not being able to physically gather in spaces, was in a lot of ways a divine providence of God shaking up and disrupting, particularly the westernized, Americanized church. Mm-hmm. And that the idea or the notion that you go to Sunday, you give a little bit of money, you do a small group, is satisfactory, right? Versus actually following the way of Jesus. Right. And at least in our city, at least in our context, a year later, those who remain are the ones who not only have stood, but those who have fought to remain standing, despite those setbacks or limitations or restrictions. And what is cultivated is actually a deepening of the relationship with Jesus, but also a burdening of what it actually means to follow Jesus, that I must follow Jesus fully, not kind of half-heartedly or passively, that the idea, even of spiritual formation is an active thing. It's not a passive thing that happens to me. It's something I must proactively do. I can't be spoon-fed from my pastor or my church, or the idea of a big Sunday service or celebration felt good, led me feeling good. And so that was enough. So I think what I'm excited for is that it seems like, there's certainly been a disruption and an awakening and a refocusing across a significant portion of the church is saying, you know what, there's got to be more than just like our go to church, put a little money in the bucket, hold a sign outside that says welcome home, and then go to my small group and then say that's what it means to be a follower of Jesus. Yeah. And for that, I'm incredibly excited and expectant.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I totally agree. And Brian Sanders actually from Tampa Underground wrote an article about that. And he just basically said, man, if somebody would have told me that the church would be asking the questions that the church is being forced to ask right now, I would say that's amazing. And obviously nobody's downplaying the global health crisis and all the tragedies that have come with it. But in terms of refocusing the church on really, what are we doing? What are we optimized for? What are we prioritizing? Whose interests is this really serving? I think it's really healthy to be asking those questions. It's better to ask them when you're not forced to ask them, but either way, it's good to be asking them. And so I appreciate that you're not only asking those questions, but forming a community into a unit in a cohort that can be putting those things into practice. And I just love that you and your wife and your family are really going after it. So Ricky, thanks for hopping on tonight and celebrating with us this 50th episode. Thank you very much. And enjoy the rest of your time in Hawaii. And to all our listeners, you guys are the best, and we'll keep it going.